he has been very keen to do a deal with China. And I think this time he'll do a deal with China, and it's not going to be just a trade deal. It will go beyond a trade deal, maybe a partly geopolitical.
Decline of Europe, the rise of China, and now the rise of India, the way things were, the whole architecture was simply not tenable. So the fact that it is now falling apart that President Trump is giving it one last heave-ho shouldn't distract us from the fact that it wasn't working anyway. It certainly wasn't working for America, and in many ways did not work for India either. We were in many ways stuck in a space that was created for us in a very different time. I mean, why on earth don't we have, for example, a seat on the Security Council? It makes no sense.
It's very important to understand that there's only one country in the world which has a 26% share in global GDP, which has 44% of the market capitalization, with just 4% of the population.
India and the global game in the Trump era. This session brings together an exceptional panel of thought leaders who will explore how India's foreign policy, economic strategies, and global positioning evolved during a time of significant geopolitical shifts. You already had the privilege of listening to Mr. Amitabh Kant. His expertise in policy making and economic development will make him an invaluable voice in this discussion. I would like to now introduce the other speakers on the panel. As I say your name and start to speak of you, I would greatly appreciate if you could walk up and take your seat anywhere on this stage. Our next speaker is His Excellency T.S. Tirumurti, who is a seasoned diplomat and has a distinguished career in India's foreign service since 1985. Welcome, sir. He has served as India's permanent representative to the United Nations and as secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, overseeing economic relations with the Gulf, Africa, and in India's developmental partnerships. His extensive postings include embassies in Egypt, the US, Indonesia, and Malaysia, as well as being India's first representative to the Palestinian Authority. He served in the UN in Geneva and holds key positions in the Ministry of External Affairs, covering South Asia and multilateral affairs as well. Our next speaker, joining them on the panel, is Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, an economist, historian, and who serves as a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. Mr. Sanyal has helped prepare 6 editions of the Economic Survey of India and has represented India at G7 and OECD meetings. He's also the Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. He's known for his innovative thinking and interdisciplinary approach. Mr. Sanyal, as many of you know, has authored several acclaimed books, including The Indian Renaissance, Land of the Seven Rivers, and his insights into economic policy and policy here will add a rich dimension to this conversation. Welcome, Mr. Sanyal. Moderating this session is Prabal Dasgupta, celebrated author, columnist, military veteran, and a business leader. Prabal is a historian with a focus on military history and maritime affairs, and he's the best-selling author of Watershed 1967 and Camouflaged. You'll likely have seen him also as an expert on several panels on news channels on geopolitics. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Prabal, and a big round of applause for all of our panelists.
Thank you, Sandhya, and thanks everyone for bringing yourself over. I can say that, on this subject of India and the global game in the era of Donald Trump, this is possibly the best panel that I can think of. And I'm so grateful to Mr. Amitabh Kant, Sanjeev Sanyal, and Ambassador Tirumurti for being here. And I'm sure we'll have a great session, and as also the other ones that follow in this literature festival. Till last evening, I was thinking that, every day we wake up to a twist in the tale. And Mr. Kant put it aptly, I've just changed it. We wake up to a new spectacle. So that's what it has transpired, and he brought that out. And we have read in the newspapers what's happened last night in the Oval House, White House. As America redraws its contours, its terms of engagement with the world, from Gaza to Europe, to Ukraine, Asia, to trade and tariffs. I think everywhere, as the new decisions, the new policies of Donald Trump's government have been unleashed, they've had this great impact. And everywhere, every day, we have new developments on whether it is the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, whether it's the new tariffs on China, whether it is the conversation with Mr. Zelensky, etc. So I, without much ado, would begin the session with a question to all of you, beginning with Ambassador Tirumurti. With America under President Donald Trump redrawing contours of engagement with the world in a break from the past, we had an America of the post-World War, which had a certain way of engaging, wherein you had the multilateral institutions, etc. Now, in the realm of geopolitics and security and conflicts, rather, what are the two most critical areas that you think are likely to be impacted by these decisions, or are likely to come up in the next couple of years, or 2 to 3 years?
No, thank you very much first for having me on the panel. Now, the thing is that let me just briefly mention about Trump 1.0, his first term, where he caused tremendous geopolitical disruptions. And we all know about what he did with China. But there were also many others which he either started or he could not start for various reasons. And I think when you look at Trump 2.0, you need to first see what did he start and what he wanted to start and couldn't finish. So I see the Trump 2.0 as an extension of the first, and of course also taking it forward in other ways. One of the most important thing which he wanted to do in his first term, and which he said so many words he couldn't do, was Russia. He wanted the rapprochement with Russia. It didn't take place. And that has been his primary objective right now. But the difference now is that now you have two raging conflicts, which you just mentioned about Ukraine and the Gaza war. So therefore, in order to effect a rapprochement with Russia, he certainly has to tackle Ukraine first. And that is why you see what is happening now, that you saw the spectacle yesterday. And this is all Trump's way of dealing with Russia, but trying to get Ukraine out of the way. He has also dealt with EU and NATO, even his first term, and it continues to tell them the second term that they have to take charge, a greater charge of their own security, and they should start looking at it differently. And in fact, they are also very concerned about the rise of radicalization and the very fact that the so-called liberal policies of the West are being taken advantage of by illiberal values. I think that's something which bothers him. When you look at Israel, he was very supportive in the first term. You already know about it. But the second term, this support has been tempered by the fact that you have the Gaza war. And therefore, even before he took over, he was able to get a ceasefire. And it was only because of him that they got the ceasefire. And in fact, the pressure came on Netanyahu, not on Hamas, as people widely expected. So going now into implementing the ceasefire, I think I'm not so sure that he's going to support the resumption of conflicts. And finally, on the Trump 1 and 2, he's very clear that he wants to withdraw the United States from the global stage, one way or another. And that we saw literally a very clumsy withdrawal from Afghanistan, which of course came during Biden's time, but Mr. Trump started it. And then you had withdrawal from Paris Accord, you have withdrawal from WHO, and a whole lot of other things. So coming to the 2 points you mentioned, my first point, I would say, there are more than 2 points, but the two main ones I would say is China. He has been very keen to do a deal with China. And I think this time he'll do a deal with China, and it's not going to be just a trade deal. It will go beyond a trade deal, maybe partly geopolitical. In which case, if he does that, then it will certainly have a big impact on what Europe does, what Indo-Pacific does, and what India does. It's definitely. And if you're going to combine this deal with China with his interest in withdrawing from the world stage, so to say, then it can get very difficult, because that will ensure that China's influence increases, not decreases. Second is if they are going to sit and talk about spheres of influence, it's going to be even worse. So I think this is something India will have to be very careful when they negotiate. India has the ability, it has the capacity, it has the independent foreign policy, it has the strategic autonomy, everything going for it. But yes, we will need to look at a very changed geopolitical scenario if they reach out to China. And where do we fit in this? Because China is not just a neighbor with problems, but we also have a geopolitical issue with China to deal with. The second important aspect which I see is fragmentation. This fragmentation is taking place not just in geopolitics, but it is also taking place in trade. It will take place in, will take place in investments. It will take place in technology. When every aspect of technology is being weaponized, you're going to have protectionist walls, so many other things. There will be a fragmentation, and when there is fragmentation, you fend for yourself. That's basically what it means. It doesn't matter whether you're a developing country or a developed one. You fend for yourself. And that is where I think India, with its strength, has an opportunity. We should treat it as an opportunity and need not be defensive about it. I think so far we have focused on the economy, and rightly so. We are fifth largest. We want to be third. We want to be fourth. But ultimately, when it comes to the two major conflicts, which is Ukraine and Gaza, I think on the geopolitical front, India has been a lot more circumspect. We have not plunged into either of them for very good reasons. But if we have to look at our potential to play a much larger geopolitical role, I think this is the time for India to do it. We should be far less circumspect in playing that role. And I know if you look at it, the space is now being occupied by countries like Turkey. Saudi Arabia is getting into it. So I think it's about time that we start getting into this geopolitical space, and there is space for it. We have the credibility, we have the size, and we should start playing a bigger role. Thank you.
Sanjeev, question for you. What do you think are the two major points in the current scenario? And just leading from what Ambassador Tirumurti mentioned, India has been playing, has been balancing the whole thing. When you look at Ukraine, when you look at some of the other conflicts across the world, Prime Minister Modi said, this is no era for war. Of course, we are in the middle of two. Where do you see this going? And do you think India can play or is playing a more proactive role geopolitically at the moment?
Good morning, everyone. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to a very interesting venue. Clearly been designed in such a way that you either have to be left-wing or right-wing, and there's no space for centrists at all. Having said that, there are some seats here, there are one seat there, so another one here. So those of you sitting on the chairs there, please feel free to fill them out. Unless you want to completely sit out this ideological divide, or the far left.
Sanjeev, this had happened 100 years ago, and when Gandhi gave his first speech here, the scripted speech, and that was the only time he spoke from a script. And after that, he never did.
Okay. So anyway, coming back to the topic, clearly we are living in a time when things are fluid. A certain geopolitical architecture which first came into being just after the Second World War. Then, of course, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it got even more clearly ingrained. That has come unstuck. The fact that it was coming unstuck is not new. It was coming unstuck irrespective of whether or not President Trump came to power or not. There were clearly a problem with the decline of Europe, the rise of China, and now the rise of India. The way things were, the whole architecture was simply not tenable. So the fact that it is now falling apart, that President Trump is giving it one last heave-ho, shouldn't distract us from the fact that it wasn't working anyway. It certainly wasn't working for America, and in many ways did not work for India either. We were in many ways stuck in a space that was created for us in a very different time. I mean, why on earth don't we have, for example, a seat on the Security Council? It makes no sense. So first of all, we need to recognize that this situation is not that of President Trump's making. He is, however, trying to do something that he had his predecessor, President Biden, or he himself had not quite attempted to do in his first term, which is to actually actively try and to guide whatever is now going to appear. And in this, I don't think many of the things he's doing as random as many people may think he is. He seems to have come back to power with a sort of a plan. My sense of it is, as I said, it hasn't been fully played out. My sense of it is he wants to do two very clear things. So, first of all, I don't think it's a withdrawal of America from the world. He is reorienting it very clearly to deal with China. So it's not a withdrawal. And that means he has to withdraw from certain things which he thinks are distractions. One of them is Europe. If you've got to reorient to the Pacific, the Atlantic is a distraction. There are a whole bunch of old institutions which should function, but clearly don't. The WHO was an utter failure during the COVID crisis, right? The fact that somebody is taking it to task in some fashion, even in ways that you may not agree, but the fact of the matter is, somebody needed to actually stand up and say that, the WHO completely failed, as indeed did many of the America's own institutions, led by Anthony Fauci and others, who were actually funding some of the research that led to the outbreak and the whole cover-up afterwards. So I think in many ways, what he's trying to do, whether he succeeds or not is a different matter. But I don't think much of what President Trump is doing is either irrational or not thought through. His way of doing it may sometimes be a little brusque, but somebody had to do some of the things he's doing. Now, coming to what is perhaps of greater interest here, what do we here in India do about this? First of all, a fluid situation is not necessarily bad for us, because the old situation boxed us in a place where we were clearly weren't being given our place in the world. So a fluid situation creates the space for us to play the game in some ways, to try and build that out. Now, obviously, that is not necessarily, it's a world that is uncertain. And certainly in the short term, it makes for very difficult policy making. As a policymaker who's having to try and make policy in this environment, let me say it's very, very difficult, because I don't know what the rules of the game that I am playing is. It also means that the global economy is not growing in a sustained growth, as Mr. Kant was earlier saying. During its high growth phase, many of these Asian countries had a phase of 10, 20 years where the world was stable. They could take advantage of it in a particular way and grow very quickly. We, at least for now, don't have that space. So it is a little uncomfortable. However, there are certain things we can do in this which may play to our advantage. First of all, I think that in an environment of bilateral deals, we may be in a position to be able to negotiate good spaces for ourselves. And that is what we are attempting to do. As I said, we'll see how it plays out. But we are, as you all know, attempting to create bilateral deals with the European Union, with the United Kingdom, with also the US. So if you notice, the President Trump has so far been reasonably restrained in his comments about India. In fact, if anything, the visit by Honorable Prime Minister there was very positive. So you have to understand that in this attempt to move from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the Americans do realize that India has a place in that. And I do think, therefore, that the Indo-Pacific, the Quad and all of these things, which has kind of drifted off during the Biden years, will now be completely center stage. So I think we do need to now build up some sort of a relationship with a new America. And I think there is a space for doing that. That does not mean that we put all our eggs in the same basket. We don't need to. We can build up a relationship with Europe. As you know, the European leaders have now begun to take a much greater interest in us. Having for the first time in 70 7 years, having to actually create an independent identity for themselves. They are now beginning to wake up to the fact that they need to. But we cannot wish away China. Whether we like it or not, they are our biggest source of merchandise imports and will be for some time. We also will continue to be, for the time being, dependent on imported energy. So again, if you see, this fluid environment is being navigated in ways that are much more imaginative than before. Nobody would have believed that Prime Minister Modi would be the one that would build up this very strong relationship that we have built up with the Middle East. I mean, we now have probably the best relations we have had with Arab countries ever in our post-independent history. We will do similar things with other parts of the world as well, whether within the Quad framework, the BRICS framework. And I think the fact that we didn't abandon Russia even under very difficult circumstances is not just a signal for Russia. It's a signal for everybody that we stand by our friends even in difficult times. So all of these things, I think, do stand us well, but it will be a fluid environment where the skillful playing of the game will count for a lot.
Mr. Kant, the question to you, same thing, which are the two issues that you think are going to go big globally? Sanjeev spoke about the fluid issues, about India navigating those spaces. Ambassador Tirumurti spoke about how India should be more proactive in the geopolitical space. In your view, given that Sanjeev spoke about how India stood by Russia all along, and in a way, when we are talking about yesterday's events and other things, in a way, did India see it coming? Did India foresee certain things? Certain things that India had taken a call on seem to have come out right. What are your thoughts on the two major issues that we are likely to see, and where do you see India faring in that?
I think, first of all, it's very important to understand that there's only one country in the world which has a 26% share in global GDP, which has 44% of the market capitalization, with just 4% of the population. Whether Biden comes, Clinton comes, Obama comes, Trump comes, it doesn't matter. They control 26% of the global GDP, 44% of the market capitalization, with just 4% of the population. And they do this simply because they believe in free enterprise. And it's the private sector which drives innovation, drives risk capital, drives the growth of the United States of America. I'm saying this because Europe had 30% share in global GDP, which has come down to 18%. So and falling fast, and it's going to come down faster. China was accelerating its pace, but it's been arrested, and India's share is now accelerating. We are still at about 3.4%, but it's going to accelerate in the days to come. So first and foremost, I think Indians must be absolutely clear, and all of us in this hall must be clear, that there is no substitute to economic growth. India must continue to grow at 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, year after year. All that these two gentlemen have spoken about has no meaning till India doesn't grow at 9 to 10%. And 9 to 10% means, and that's the vision Prime Minister said, that we must be a $30+ trillion economy. And that means that every Indian and every state of India must have the similar vision of scrapping rules, regulation, procedures, acts, and making India a simple place to do business in, because the lesson for the world is that you can grow only with free enterprise. It can't grow with government putting all restrictions, etc. That's number one point. Yeah. No, because you are so pro-leftist and sitting to the left. And all economists in India are only leftists, So first viewpoint is that there is no substitute to India growing. And it's the economic growth which will give you both the hard power and the soft power of India. The second is that international institutions were non-functional or dysfunctional. You have a scenario where the UN was non-functional and the Security Council has been dysfunctional because one of the Security Council members has been at a war with several countries. The second is, out of that is that this year, for instance, 70% of the growth, global growth, world is going to grow at 3.2%, but the global south is going to grow at 4%, 4.4%. And the developed world is going to grow at 1.8%, but global south is going to grow at 4.4%. And 70% of the growth this year is going to come from global south, and for the next 3 decades, according to IMF, middle and low income countries are going to contribute 70% of the global growth. And the reason for that is young demographics in Asia and Africa, whereas America has aged, Europe is aging, Japan has aged, all these countries have aged, they have huge dependency burdens, whereas there's young population in Asia and Africa. So if 70% of the world growth is going to come from here, you need institutions which were designed in the World War II by IMF and World Bank. You did not have a challenge of climate action then. You did not have a challenge of sustainable development goals then. And they were designed for the western part of the world. They were not designed for global south. You need to direct finances which the developed world gets at 2%, India gets at 9%, Africa gets at 16%, sub-Saharan countries get 22% rate of interest. You need institutions which will de-risk these countries and allow finances for climate and SDGs to flow into these countries. Otherwise, these countries will not be able to rapidly grow with a young population. And therefore, it's very important that these dysfunctional, non-functional and malfunctioning institutions are put an end to. So I'm delighted that if Mr. Trump walks out of UN and Security Council is non-functional without India being there, it has no meaning. India is today the 5th largest economy. We've overtaken UK. Now UK is a member. Why should not UK vacate its place for India to take over there? And if India is going to overtake Germany and Japan to be a 3rd largest economy, what kind of a Security Council is it without India being there in that Security Council? So India must find a place in that Security Council. Imagine Germany is not a member there. Japan is not a member in that security. So the structure which was designed for the post-World War II is totally outdated, it's irrelevant for today's world, and it's non-functional. And therefore, it's non-functional. And therefore, it needs to be dismantled and and to that extent, I'm totally in favor of what Mr. Trump is saying in terms of the multilateral order. He may be doing it for making America great again, but it very much serves our purpose, to my mind. And the third point I want to make is that when Mr. Trump is taking action on several things, particularly on climate, etc., there's a vacuum being created. And every crisis is an opportunity, to my mind. India must seize that opportunity. And the only way to do it is to use technology to leapfrog. And much like what we've done in digital public infrastructure, that we are ahead of the world. Data is owned by the citizens of India. We've created an open source model. We've created a open API. We've created globally interoperable model. Last 3 decades, all the big tech revolution in the western part of the world was carried out by Google, Facebook, Amazon, but they own the citizens' data. They own every citizen's data, which they use for artificial intelligence. And in China, Tencent and Alibaba. In India, we don't do this. The data is owned by the citizens because we have a digital empowerment protection architecture. You can't memorize data. That is the way the world will grow in future. Now, similar thing we need to do, open source AI to progress and create our own foundational models, use quantum computing to jump forward, and use the size and scale of India to technologically pole vault. And therefore, you will become the only way to grow at high rates is using technology to leapfrog. And that is a huge opportunity. We must become the clean tech manufacturing powerhouse of the world for the future.
Thank you. Thank you. So you must seize the strategic moment, you said, in the changing world. You talked about the fluid situation. Mr. Kant wrote this fine book, and I'm going to ask you this book about how India scaled Mount G20. Now, in the light of this, we spoke about how we're moving away from multilateral institutions. India led the G20 in a very difficult hour post the COVID, and you've written about it. And it was based on the principle of inclusivity and growth, etc. Now with the US, and now taking a cue from your point, that the US is redrawing the way it's going about it. We see the US, there's an American absence at G20. Where do you see G20 going, given that there's going to be the American absence? Who's going to lead? How does this happen? Does China take on the mantle? Is there a tussle in there that you see going forward with this configuration?
My view is that the only body only multilateral forum in the world where you could arrive at agreements on issues of sustainable, balanced, inclusive growth, or you could arrive at an agreement on sustainable, accelerated implementation of SDG, or digital public infrastructure, or reform of multilateral institutions, or women-led development. All these, the only institution available today was the G20, where you had the G7, you had the Global South, you had China, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all present on the table, and only India could bring a consensus on all these key issues, cutting across all of them. Now, to my mind, the agreement which was brought about by India on the Russia-Ukraine war, that paragraph, could not be brought in the United Nations, but could be done here and could not be brought in many other places. So my view is that the United States did not participate in the G20 because the G20 was being held in South Africa, and South Africa had taken Israel to court, International Court of Justice, from which the United States has walked out. But my belief is that the United States would realize, because it also has to host the next year G20, that you can't live in a world where there's no multilateral forum. The only functional multilateral forum which exists today, where you can have discussions with both Global South and the G7 countries and China and Russia, is the G20. So my view is that it may walk out of WHO, it may walk out of WTO for its own interest, it may walk out of many other bodies which do not serve its own purpose, but it will find it very difficult to walk out of G20 on the long run.
Right. To you, Ambassador Tirumurti. Thank you, Mr. Kant. And I must add, before I go to Ambassador Tirumurti, this is a fine book. It's here. Please do, take your copies. The book would be released today, and you have books by the authors outside, so they would be available.
Don't for you. Just say please buy the book. You say.
Yes, of course. Yes. You have to. I mean, this is where he's articulated the entire period of India's leadership in G20. In the light of our conversation today, it's an important book. Ambassador Tirumurti, to you, the question leading from Mr. Kant's answer on how the US is looking at G20, and Sanjeev talked about, US has a plan. We see that US is possibly going away from multilateral deals and cutting bilateral relationships. Trump looks at policy through a business lens. Increasingly that's going to be the formula. And he's also seen to be dealing well with stronger leaders like Putin, Netanyahu, Mr. Modi. How do you view this in terms of US's impact on other multilateral relationships? Do you agree with what Mr. Kant said, and do you have another view on this?
No, I absolutely agree with Mr. Kant, partly because I've been in the UN. I was India's ambassador when we were in the Security Council. I could see its Security Council is completely dysfunctional. So there is no doubt about it. And it is also, in my opinion, a bit of clash of values. I think the way that they are going about it. But at the same time, we just saw what happened in Munich with the Europeans, for example. And also we saw the voting pattern on the Ukraine war in the UN General Assembly and in Security Council. And you could see the deep division between the United States and Europe. But let me also say at the same time, I think any proclamation of the demise of the transatlantic partnership is slightly premature. As Mark Twain says, the reports of my death are exaggerated. So it's something like that. So I think, but at the same time, we should also recognize that what the United States is fighting for is, not just about, fragmentation, but they're also fighting a few other things besides. The most important of which is the way, as I mentioned, the way the liberal framework and policies of Europe is being taken advantage of by illiberal values. And that what I meant was that you can see that radicalization is on the rise. You have religiophobia, which is coming up in a very big way. And thanks to that, we have counter, I would say that people are now going ahead and voting for the right and the far right in very big numbers. And rightly so, because they really fear that their way of life is in danger, their religion is in danger. Many things are in danger in Europe. So, and least of all, of course, the values which the Western world stands for. So I think somewhere down the line, there is, the United States are holding a mirror to the Europeans and, asking them to look at yourself and see where you're heading. But as far as multilateral things are concerned, I think there is definitely a need for change. I mean, there is no doubt about it. And India has been the most vocal proponent of what we call as reformed multilateralism, which the Prime Minister has coined. But at the same time, when you're still not there, I mean, it's still fragmented. You don't know whether the change in multilateral diplomacy or multilateral institutions will come tomorrow or 10 years later. So you are, as of now, confronted with a world which is fragmented. And in that, I think it's very, very important that we realize our full potential as a nation. And as he says that, it's absolutely crucial to get a 9 to 10% to go where we are. But at the same time, there have been times when India has been impoverished. And we continue to play a very important geopolitical role. I can only refer to the Korean War. In 1950, 51, 52, we were just 3 years as a nation. We were impoverished. We just come out of colonialism. But at the same time, we played such a crucial role in the Korean War that India was made the chair of the Neutral Nations Repatriation Committee when the Korean War ended. And we didn't mediate, but we played a role, an important role. So we can play irrespective of where we are, as long as we have the will to do it. And we have the will to do it. We have very strong leadership. And I don't see why we cannot do that.
Thank you, Ambassador Tirumurti. We have a question for Sanjeev. We've been talking about Europe. We've been talking about economics. We've been talking about Middle East. There's an elephant in the room. We haven't spoken about China and India-China and China's plans on Taiwan. Each year, when I listen to President the Chinese premier give his inaugural address in January, it is, it increasingly moves closer towards acquiring Taiwan by peaceful means. It was earlier that, you would acquire Taiwan by peaceful means. Now we're talking about the two Chinese populations living on either side of the strait. That is how the Chinese premier talks about it. Where do you think the India-China equation would go in the new framework? And given that, President Trump and the Americans are going to focus on certain things and it's going to, lay out more tariffs on China, we are also going to see, India and China at crosshairs when we talk about Quad. We spoke about some of these arrangements. Where is Quad going and where do you think the India-China equation is going there?
Let me say that it's impossible to guess what exactly the Chinese actually intend to do on Taiwan. So I'm not going to try and guess at all. Listening to their speeches tells you absolutely nothing. Irrespective of whatever sweet nothings they say in their speeches, the fact is that almost on a weekly basis, you have warships or aircrafts, etc., going along the edges of Taiwanese sea or airspace. In fact, just I think a few days ago, they cut the undersea cable. So there's continuous pressure on Taiwan. And so, I mean, I would find it very, very surprising if this is going to end in any peaceful way. It could, but, I wouldn't bet on it. Now, what India should do about all of this? Well, militarily, we can do very little. It's on the other side of the oceans, and we have very little way of doing very much about this. But the fact of the matter is that we have our own issues with China, but at the same time, we trade with them. They are a major source of imports. And frankly, there are many, many products in which they are the single source of imports anywhere in the world. So irrespective of where in the world you are, we can be very proud of our pharmaceuticals industry. We are the pharmacists of the world and so on. But so many of the critical APIs, that ingredients that go into it, come from China. And while we can protect and try and build up some, the fact is, for any reasonable time horizon, we will be dependent on them for many things. So we have to deal with them. They are also, by the way, now the world's second largest source of FDI. And in some ways, we are denying this to ourselves because by virtue of, there's a press note 3 which restricts their investments into India. So, we need to begin to think about, are we overdoing this? Because if that investment goes to Vietnam and we are anyway buying it from a Chinese company which is based somewhere, why not let them manufacture the same thing in India? If we're going to import it from them, we might as well let them invest it. If anything, that investment is a hostage. So, we've got to begin thinking about this much, much more creatively, how to deal with frenemy, so to speak. Yeah. Now, in this context, let me say, I totally agree with what Mr. Kant said. This game can only be played, or we can only play this game, if our own standing in the world grows. And there are many places where it may grow, but one area has to be our economic clout. We have to keep growing at a very rapid pace and sustain it over a generation to really meaningfully engage in this developing fluid world. In fact, it's, as I said, a huge opportunity. And this will not get done by the Mai Baap Sarkar. I agree with him. Yeah. So we need to get serious about creating a new and emerging risk-taking class. This risk-taking class will not emerge out of the existing business elite. I've tweeted about this in the last few days. It went viral. But the fact of the matter is, the creative destruction process that leads to continuous first-generation entrepreneurs coming up, taking risks, creating companies, that culture still does not exist. 30 years after we started liberalizing our economy, the bulk of our really big companies are essentially the same companies that existed, even at many of them existed in independence. So we need to allow for this creative destruction process to happen, and we need to allow new risk takers to come. We need cheap capital for those risk takers to take and scale up. All of this requires deregulation. We need cheap capital. And very importantly, we need to stop having this fear of, that somehow rapid growth could all go bust, and there'll be, all kinds of bad things will happen as a result of those, whether it's inequality or environmental degradation, etc. Now, look, many of those things will happen. We have to find ways of managing them. But to simply deny the process itself because of something bad may happen, or have this idea that all of economics is about doing some RCT survey and creating a scheme or freebies, that I think we have to give up. Right. We have to get on with it. And, this city itself is a good example of taking the opposite route. If we took the traditional approach we took, we simply wouldn't have built the coastal road or the new metro line or the new Atal bridge to the mainland or the new airport. Yeah. All of this is being built as we speak. And yet we didn't do this. And in fact, even the attempt to build this, remember, along the way was stopped by all kinds of, in my view at least, ridiculous objections. So we have, as a country, to get serious about growth. And that requires for us to be focused on this and to get on with it. Being queasy somehow about rapid growth and its implications, and therefore stalling it because, we may not like some of the externalities that may happen because of it, simply misses the point. We will miss a major opportunity in world history if we are not aggressive right now.
Thank you, Sanjeev. That's very, very well explained. Mr. Kant, you have said often that China had become the manufacturing capital mostly because of US outsourcing, and you've said that today as well. Since we're on the subject of China, how do you see that side being corrected? And you've spoken about how India needs to ramp up. But given that, there is also already, like for instance, the semiconductor industry and Taiwan holds a major share. Where do you see that going? Where do you see some of these specific, sunrise manufacturing industries going, and what India is doing in that regard?
So, on semiconductor and chips, etc., there's a very nice book by Chris Miller called The Chips War. And I think those of you who are interested in strategy must read that book, because why it's important to understand is that if China annexes Taiwan, as it says, even by war we'll annex it. I mean, they've gone on record to say that even by war we'll annex it. Then they will control almost 90% of the semiconductor and chip. And they will therefore control airlines, they will control automobile, they'll control fighter planes, they'll control mobiles, they'll control everything in the world. Because everything is going to be run on chips, and therefore China then becomes supreme. So you need, and that is why you need to work with trusted partners, and you need to build a semiconductor and chip manufacturing. And that's why we have a 76,000 crore semiconductor production linked incentive. And that is why while we are doing a lot of Micron, etc., doing a lot of chip designing in India, our aim is to become a manufacturer. And that's why in Dholera, Tata's with TMSC is putting up a plant for chip manufacturing of the right size. Now, this is a time-taking process. It will happen. And we'll have to build up that capacity. And you will have to also do it in many other cutting-edge areas. It's important. But to the point which Sanjeev made about China, it's important to say that actually in 2015, India had opened up investments for China. A lot of Chinese companies came in. They came in, in Xiaomi, and many others came in, MG Motors, many others came in, and they started doing manufacturing in India. The problem arose when they created a border problem for us. You can't be living in India and creating a border problem for us, and India not acting on that. And therefore, India came out with a press note 3, which I think was called for, and to put an end to China's investment, doing away with their apps and sending the message home that you can't create a border problem for us, and then you want to free trade and penetrate India's market with your investments and then take over our markets. So we send that message home. And very strong and very brutal and ruthless message was sent by Government of India. And India is the only country which, through very tough diplomatic negotiations, has sorted out its border problem with China. And that goes to the credit of our diplomacy that we were able to sort out. Other countries have gone through very tough time, but India has taken a very tough stance with China and sorted it out. Now, having sorted this out, it's also important to understand that we need component manufacturing, for instance. We are doing Apple manufacturing. We need component manufacturing. The whole world had outsourced its manufacturing to China. And Europe had outsourced, America had outsourced. So everybody had lost the art of component manufacturing, machine manufacturing in Europe and America. What the Chinese did, they took German technology, they did Japan technology, they did reverse engineering, improvised on it, and that's how maglev, etc. came up in China. They are not original innovators. They are re-engineers of technology. They're not great innovators, but they're re-engineers. They do reverse engineering and improvise on it. And therefore, a lot of that at low costs is available in China, and component and in global supply chain, which works at very competitive prices. You need component manufacturing in India, and you need equipment for that to be done. And therefore, in some of these areas, the government is now after having sorted out the border problem, is opening up to doing component manufacturing and seeing that technology comes in for PLI sectors, etc. And I think it'll be a gradual process. It can't be overnight. You can't stab a country on the border and then say that you open up completely. It'll have to be a gradual process in the national interest of India. And I think it is being done. It is being done in a very, very innovative and creative manner. And that is being done right now. And I think it's important also to understand that China works with its enemies. China is a creation of Taiwanese investments in China. China is also a creation of Japanese investments into China. So we will work in some of these areas, but we'll do it in a very in a manner where we strengthen our manufacturing, we manufacture growth, but we do it in our national interest, and we'll push for that in the PLI sector. Right. The second point which Sanjeev was making was about India growing and rapidly. And yes. to that, I think, India is a very large country, and therefore many of these states have to be a key driver of growth. And states have to play it can't just be central government. Central government has done a lot of opening up of policies. It's scrapped a vast number of rules, regulation. But many of this over-regulation continues in state governments, and state governments need to be now the key drivers of growth and key drivers of good governance in the years to come. You can't have fiscal mismanagement. You can't have excessive populism for election purposes. You can't have, schemes of distributing largesse, and you need really good governance in states to really, if you have 10 to 12 states growing at 10% plus, then India will automatically grow.
Right. No, thank you very much. That kind of sums up the way we see India growing and we see India approaching the world stage. Ambassador Tirumurti, one quick question. We started from Europe, we started from the White House, in fact, and we went to Europe, we went everywhere, we went to China. Now we come to the neighborhood. And, Mr. Kant spoke about the skirmish with China. Taking a cue from that, we now see what I call it as a surrogate war. When we look at the neighborhood, what's happening in Maldives, what's happening in Nepal, it happened in Sri Lanka, Hambantota, happened in Bangladesh. It's happening in Bangladesh. The Bangladesh army chief virtually put the government on notice yesterday. So, some of these things are happening around us in the neighborhood. Where do you see this going? Do you see the India-China rivalry, which we spoke about, spilling over into the neighborhood in a more surrogate sort of a way, where we don't take on each other head on, because they're the pegs of cooperation, conflict, and competition, out of which conflict goes away, and we are trying to get cooperation and competition in the fray. But does the conflict go away to the neighboring countries, and do we see a surrogate war, a battle or tussle for space there? How does India fare?
Whenever there is a backsliding on democracy, China takes advantage of it. And certainly in our neighborhood, there is a backsliding on democracy. Just look at where we were between 2008 and 2010. In 2008, after 30 years of President Gayoom in Maldives, they had their first multi-party elections and President Nasheed came to power. In 2009, after nearly 30 years of LTTE, they were finished in April 2009. In 2010, after 20 years, you had elections in Myanmar. After 17, 18 years, Aung San Suu Kyi was free. After more than a decade in Bangladesh, when you had turmoil and when you even had a military coup, in 2008, 2009, the first clean elections took place and Sheikh Hasina came to power. And even in Pakistan, in 2008, you had a civilian government and General Musharraf went on exile. So therefore, that was a time when democracy, we were hoping, will take root. And when you come 16, 17 years later, it doesn't look too optimistic. And I think that is where we need to look at what is happening around us. In Sri Lanka, when this Aragalaya and all the other things happened and the president left, India was a model neighbor. We bailed them out, we steadied them, and they are back. And I think this is a great example of how a neighbor should be with another neighbor. But the two real concerns are Bangladesh and Myanmar. And in Myanmar, if it implodes, it's going to have a very big impact on India short term and the medium term. Bangladesh is a very unfortunate situation which is happening. They are having anti-India forces and others. So this is sometimes, these are occasions in which China can definitely play a part and try to wean them away and try and encircle us one way or another geopolitically. But I would just like to end on this note that, when the genie of democracy has been released from the bottle, it is very difficult to put it back. So I am far more optimistic about our neighborhood as far as not just combating China, but also trying to come back to the path of democracy.
Thank you. And I would add to this, the genie of economic growth, when it's released from the bottle, it has potential far beyond we can imagine. As I promised at the start of the session, we have the three most eminent panelists that one can ever get on this subject. Through the last 40 minutes, we covered the world, we covered Europe, we covered China, we covered the neighborhood, we covered India's prospects.
Yes. See, there is already a G2. Okay, so it's not as if you had to create a G2. If you look at the next 4 countries after G2, all of them combined together, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, is 1 GDP of China. So, there is a G2. But there is a multipolar world. India is a major power. Let's accept it. That's very, very important to understand. And we are going to be there sometime and very soon. But as far as Trump is concerned, if he does a deal with China, it will impact everyone. There is no doubt about it. There will be geopolitical impact. But that is, as long as there is going to be this no limits partnership between Russia and China, which they have, Trump is trying to dislodge this no limits partnership. And it's good for us. As Mr. Kant was saying, many things he's doing is good for us. So I think we'll have to see how it shapes up.
There are a few things that you need to remember. One of them is that in some ways, a reading of history will show that these kinds of situations have occurred in the past. If you go back through the last 500 years, you'll see that rise of Britain as an economy was actually funded by the Dutch, with whom they had very blow hot, blow cold relationship and had many wars. The British, having become a major global power, actually funded the industrialization of Germany and America. And then, of course, they had wars. By the way, also British capital funded the industrialization of Japan as well in all of these three at the turn of the last century. And then, of course, it ended up in war. But after the war, then America is the one that then funded the reindustrialization of Europe and Japan. It is then Japan and then later on Korea, Taiwan, etc. that industrialized China. So there is a long history of, the economic logic and geostrategic logic can play themselves out in extremely unpredictable ways. Even the rise geopolitically of of China was due to American interest in weaning away China from the USSR, in a mirror of what they're trying to do today. So many of these things have happened in the past. In the long run, they lead to all kinds of unintended consequences. So the game is not to have this sort of plan of how the world will turn out. The world will evolve in multiple ways. The game for India is to be clear about our own interests. Number 2, to play this deftly and not get stuck in some ideological or some other kind of position. Many things will happen. Just imagine, we were completely isolated from much of the West vis-a-vis our position on Russia very, very recently. And now the Americans are voting along with the Russians in the UN. In fact, we have abstained. So I'm just telling you that the world is always fluid and complicated. Our game is that we should have options and we should be clear what we want.
Sanjeev forgot the most important point, and that was that India actually financed the evolution of UK into a superpower. When we got And that's the most important part, because when we got colonized in 1700, India's share of global GDP was 26%. By the time we became independent, it had come down to 4.9%. So actually, Indian economy was used to make England the biggest superpower of that particular point of time. And the second point I want to make is that the world is getting reconfigured. It's being reset. And to my mind, Trump's attempt at this point of time is to wean Russia away from China, where Russia has become the junior brother of China. Because economically and globally, it's important that if China continues its growth from about 17%, 18% of global GDP, it'll then continue to have a direct competition with China for with America for global supremacy. And therefore, it's very, very important for Trump right now, to wean Russia away. And that is why his first attempt is that it's not just durable peace in Ukraine, but to end war. End war in Ukraine, get Russia back, and then move forward in many other directions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kant and Sanjeev and Ambassador Tirumurti. What we were speaking about a short while ago, Sanjeev spoke about how configurations are changing. You know, the irony is that 5 decades ago, the Americans were trying to wean away the Chinese against the then Soviet Union, and now they're doing just the opposite. So that's where we are. We live in interesting times. And like we said at the start of the session, there's never a dull day in these times of Donald Trump 2.0 and a rising India and a Europe which probably is going away or thinking on its own. We have a very, very different setup, and we are going to see more of that in the years to come of this presidency of Donald Trump. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Ambassador Tirumurti, Mr. Kant, Sanjeev Sanyal, thank you so much for giving us the time. Thank you.